The transport ship docked at Kepler Prime Academy just after the morning meal period. Jake Martinez stepped off the ramp carrying a simple duffel bag and a small carrier that made soft mewing sounds. He looked around the massive docking bay with wide eyes, taking in the incredible sight of dozens of alien species moving about their daily routines. A tall, blue-skinned Andranian approached him with a welcoming smile. "You must be our new human cadet." "I'm Commander Ithara, Head of Student Services. Welcome to Kepler Prime." "Thank you, Commander," Jake replied, setting down the carrier carefully. "This is quite a place." "Indeed it is. Now, about your companion animal." Commander Ithara peered at the carrier with curiosity. "Our medical files indicate it's classified as emotional support." Jake nodded and opened the carrier door. A small orange tabby cat poked its head out, looked around with alert green eyes, then stepped out onto the deck with the confidence of a creature that owned whatever space it occupied. "This is Moxie," Jake said, scratching behind the cat's ears. "She helps me stay calm in stressful situations." Commander Ithara stared at Moxie with fascination. "Remarkable. We've never had a companion species at the Academy before. How do you communicate with it?" "Well, cats don't really communicate the way you might think," Jake explained. "Moxie pretty much does whatever she wants. I just try to keep up." As if to prove his point, Moxie began walking away from them, tail held high, completely ignoring Jake's calls to come back. She approached a group of Kythera cadets who backed away nervously, their wings buzzing with alarm. "Is it dangerous?" one of them chittered. "No, just curious," Jake said, hurrying over to scoop up Moxie. "Sorry about that. She's very friendly." Word of the humans' arrival spread quickly through the academy. By midday, clusters of cadets were gathering to catch glimpses of both Jake and his unusual companion. Most had never seen anything like either of them. Jake's first official class was Basic Coalition History, taught by an elderly Ventari whose 3 eyes sparkled with intelligence. As Jake entered the classroom, conversations stopped. 50 pairs of alien eyes turned to study him. "Ah, our human cadet," the instructor said in melodious tones. "Please take any available seat." Jake looked around the room. Most cadets sat in species-based groups, but there was an empty chair near a solitary figure in the back corner. The cadet appeared humanoid, but with pale, almost translucent skin and silver hair. They sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, with no expression. "Is that seat taken?" Jake asked, approaching the isolated cadet. Cadet 13 turned their head slightly. Up close, Jake could see that their eyes were an unusual violet color, almost glowing. "No other cadet chooses to sit near me." "Well, I'm not like other cadets," Jake said with a friendly smile, settling into the chair. "I'm Jake Martinez. I am designated Cadet 13. Nice to meet you, 13. Mind if I call you that?" Stared at him for a long moment. "Most cadets do not attempt casual conversation with me." "Why not?" "I am Zalani. Our species maintains natural psychic barriers. Others find my presence uncomfortable." Jake shrugged. "I don't feel uncomfortable. Then again, I'm human. We don't have any psychic abilities, so maybe that's why." For the first time in memory, Cadet 13 felt genuinely surprised. This human showed no signs of the nervous tension that other species displayed around Zalani. No unconscious step backward, no averted gaze, no emotional discomfort. Just easy, natural conversation. The history lesson began, covering the formation of the coalition and the integration of various species. Jake listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he was thinking deeply about the material. His questions were different from what other cadets asked, less focused on memorizing facts, more interested in understanding relationships and motivations. Why did the Sorrows join the coalition if they prefer territorial isolation? Jake asked. Because mathematical analysis proved the benefits outweighed the costs, 13 answered automatically. But what did they feel about it? Jake pressed. I mean, giving up your preferred lifestyle must have been emotionally difficult. Paused. The question had never occurred to them. Emotions are not relevant to logical decision-making, aren't they? I mean, if you don't consider how people feel about changes, how do you know they'll actually follow through on decisions? The instructor smiled. An excellent point, Cadet Martinez. Understanding motivation is crucial for effective leadership. After class, Jake walked with 13 toward the dining hall. So what's it like being a Zilani? Having psychic barriers, I mean. It provides clarity, 13 replied. No emotional interference from other minds. No random thoughts disrupting logical processes. Sounds kind of lonely, though. Stopped walking. Lonely? I do not understand this concept. You know, missing connections with other people, wishing you had friends to talk to, share experiences with. I do not require social connections. They are inefficient and create complications. Jake studied 13's face carefully. There was something in their expression, a slight tightness around the eyes, that suggested the Zilani wasn't as certain as they sounded. In the dining hall, Jake attracted more attention as he navigated the complex array of species-specific food stations. He approached each serving area with genuine curiosity, asking questions about different dietary requirements and cultural food traditions. You're very interested in learning about us, observed Cadet Vex, the friendly Andranian. Most new cadets stick to their own species' food. Well, I figure if we're all going to serve together in the Coalition fleet, I should understand what makes each species tick, Jake replied. Plus, some of this stuff looks really interesting. He joined a mixed table of cadets, immediately adapting his conversation style to each species' communication preferences. With the melodic Ventari, he spoke in rhythm. With the visual Soros, he used expressive hand gestures. With the logical Andromedans, he asked analytical questions. They watched from their usual isolated table, fascinated despite themselves. Jake seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of social dynamics that 13 had never encountered. The human was creating connections across species barriers that should have been insurmountable. More puzzling was Jake's companion animal. Moxie had been given special permission to accompany Jake to meals, and the small cat was drawing curious attention from every species present. Unlike Jake, who adapted his behavior to others, Moxie simply acted like herself, confident, independent, and utterly indifferent to whether others understood her or not. "Your cat is very strange," Cadet Yuli commented, approaching Jake's table nervously. "She looks at us like she's judging our worth." Jake laughed. "That's just how cats are. They don't care about your rank, your species, or your achievements. They decide if they like you based on their own mysterious criteria." "How do you control her behavior?" "I don't. That's not how cats work. They're partners, not servants." This concept seemed to blow the minds of several cadets. Most coalition species operated on hierarchical structures with clear command relationships. The idea of a partnership based on mutual respect rather than control was foreign to them. As the meal period ended, 13 approached Jake hesitantly. "Your interaction patterns are unusual for a new cadet." "Thanks, I think." Jake replied with a grin. Want to walk back to the dorms together? 13 nodded, still trying to process their confusion. They walked in comfortable silence through the academy corridors, Moxie trotting along beside them with typical feline confidence. Why does your companion animal show no fear of me? 13 asked, suddenly. Jake looked down at Moxie, who was indeed walking closer to 13 than most creatures dared. Cats don't really do fear the way other animals do. Moxie's probably just curious about you. But my psychic barriers should create instinctive avoidance in non-telepathic species. Maybe cats are just too stubborn to care about psychic barriers, Jake suggested. Moxie's always been good at ignoring things that are supposed to stop her. As they reached the dormitory entrance, 13 experienced something they had never felt before: reluctance to end a conversation. For the first time in their life, they had encountered beings who seemed genuinely unaffected by their untouchable nature. Will you be attending tactical simulations tomorrow? 13 asked. Wouldn't miss it, Jake replied. I'm curious to see how human strategies compare to galactic standards. Watched Jake and Moxie disappear down the corridor toward the human quarters. For the first time in memory, their perfect isolation felt less like strength and more like something they were missing. They dismissed the feeling as illogical and retired to their quarters for evening meditation. But that night, their meditation was interrupted by a soft, scratching sound at their door. The morning alarm echoed through the halls of Kepler Prime Academy, and Cadet 13 opened their eyes exactly 3 seconds before it sounded. They always did. The Zilani never needed alarms, but the Academy insisted on maintaining schedules that worked for all species. Cadet 13 sat up on their meditation mat, feeling the familiar emptiness around them. Other cadets described their quarters as cold or unwelcoming, but 13 found the silence perfect. No random thoughts bleeding through the walls, no emotional noise from neighboring rooms, just pure, clean, quiet. They moved through their morning, routine with mechanical precision. Physical conditioning took exactly 23 minutes. Nutrition intake required another 8. Mental exercises consumed 15 more. Every day, the same schedule, the same results, the same perfect isolation. The hallways buzzed with alien chatter as 13 made their way to the first class. Insectoid Kithara clicked and chittered to each other. The reptilian Sauros communicated through color changes in their scales. Three-eyed Ventari spoke in harmonious tones that sounded like singing. All of them gave 13 a wide berth. It was not fear, exactly. The other cadets respected 13's abilities. In 2 years at the academy, no one had beaten them in combat simulations. Their tactical scores broke records that had stood for decades. Instructors praised their logical thinking and analytical skills, but nobody tried to be friends. "Morning, 13!" called out Cadet Vex, a blue-skinned Andranian with 4 arms. Vex always used the shortened name, even though 13 never responded to casual greetings. The Andranian was one of the few who still tried to make conversation. Nodded slightly and kept walking. Vex's emotional aura felt like warm sunshine, bright and welcoming. It made 13 uncomfortable. Emotions were messy, unpredictable things that got in the way of clear thinking. The tactical simulation classroom held 50 cadets from 12 different species. As usual, 13 took a seat in the back corner, away from the clusters of chattering groups. They watched the social dynamics with clinical interest. The Kithara formed tight circles based on hive loyalty. The Sauros paired off according to territorial instincts. The Ventari created harmony groups that sang softly together. Everyone had their place, their connections, their understood roles. Everyone except 13, Commander Kilos, a stern Saros with dark green scales, activated the main display. Today we run the Meridian scenario. 4th-year simulation. Some of you may not survive. 13 almost smiled. They had run the Meridian scenario in their sleep, literally. Their dreams often involved tactical problems more complex than anything the Academy could devise. Form teams of 5, Kilos commanded. Mixed species. You have 60 seconds. The room erupted into motion. Cadets called out to friends, formed quick alliances, negotiated team positions. 13 remained seated, watching the chaos with detached amusement. Eventually, 4 other cadets would be assigned to them. It always worked out the same way. Cadet Yuli, a nervous Ventari, approached hesitantly. Cadet 13, we need one more for our team. Studied the group. 2 Andromedans, 1 Cathara, and Yuli. A reasonable mix of abilities. They stood and followed the team to their assigned station without speaking. The Meridian scenario began with their ship stranded in enemy territory. Standard protocol called for stealth operations and gradual reconnaissance. 13 immediately began calculating optimal patrol routes and resource allocation strategies. Maybe we should discuss our approach? Suggested Cadet Nyx, one of the Andromedans. Looked at them blankly. I have determined the most efficient strategy. Follow my instructions precisely, and we will complete the mission in minimal time. For the next hour, 13 issued commands while their teammates followed orders. They rescued the stranded colonists, defeated the enemy patrol, and escaped with 0 casualties. Perfect execution. Flawless results. Excellent work, Team 7, Commander, Kilos announced as the simulation ended. Cadet 13, once again your tactical analysis was superb. The praise felt hollow. 13 had succeeded, but their teammates looked frustrated and angry. Cadet Nyx shook their head and walked away without speaking. Yuli's harmonious tones had shifted to discordant notes that indicated stress. You never let us contribute, Cadet Zara the Cathara buzzed angrily. We might have ideas too. Tilted their head, genuinely puzzled. Your ideas would have been less efficient. I calculated the optimal solution. It's not about efficiency. Zara's wings vibrated with irritation. It's about working together. The beat. Concept made no sense to 13. Working together meant following the best plan available. Their plans were always the best. What more did these cadets want? After classes ended, 13 returned to their quarters to find an unusual message waiting. The Academy's admission office had sent notification of a new arrival. Human designation, Jake Martinez. Species classification, Terran. Companion animal authorization, approved. Had heard of humans, though they had never encountered one directly. Earth was a recent addition to the coalition, barely qualifying for associate membership. Humans possessed no telepathic abilities, limited technological development, and emotional regulation problems that most species found disturbing. The fact that this human was bringing an animal companion was particularly strange. Most civilized species had evolved beyond the need for interspecies bonding. The practice seemed primitive and illogical, dismissed the information as irrelevant, and began their evening meditation routine. They settled onto their mat, letting their mind sink into the familiar emptiness. The psychic barriers that defined their species created a perfect sphere of silence around them. No thoughts could enter. No emotions could disturb their peace. It was everything they had ever known, and everything they thought they wanted. Outside their window, a transport ship approached the Academy's docking bay. Inside that ship, a young human sat nervously with a small orange cat sleeping in his lap. Neither of them knew that their arrival would change everything for the cadet who believed being untouchable was the same thing as being strong. The cat opened one yellow eye, yawned, and went back to sleep. In a few hours, the galaxy would learn something new about the power of connection, the strength found in vulnerability, and the way a simple creature with no respect for barriers could change the course of history. But for now, Cadet 13 meditated, in perfect lonely silence, unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down by the most unlikely teacher imaginable. Cadet 13 opened their eyes and sat perfectly still on their meditation mat. The scratching sound came again, soft, persistent, and completely unexpected. In 2 years at the Academy, nothing had ever disturbed their evening meditation. The psychic barriers that surrounded their quarters created an area of instinctive avoidance that kept all living creatures away. The scratching continued, accompanied by a faint mewing sound, stood slowly, and approached their door. The Academy's environmental systems included small maintenance passages that ran between the walls, allowing air circulation and access for repair work. Something had apparently found its way into those passages. They opened the door and looked down. A small orange face peered up at them from a ventilation grate near the floor. Green eyes blinked once, then the face disappeared back into the darkness. Curious, 13 murmured, closing the door and returning to their mat. The scratching resumed immediately, more insistent this time. 13 tried to ignore it and sink back into meditation, but the sound was impossible to dismiss. After several minutes of futile concentration, they stood again and examined the ventilation grate more carefully. The metal screen had been pushed loose from one corner. As 13 knelt to investigate, a small orange paw emerged and batted at their fingers. Then Moxie squeezed through the gap and stepped into 13's quarters with the casual confidence of a creature who belonged everywhere she chose to be. Stared at the cat in shock. No living thing had ever entered their personal space before. The psychic barriers that defined their existence should have made Moxie uncomfortable, nervous, eager to escape. Instead, the small feline looked around the sparse quarters with interest, then walked directly to 13's meditation mat and settled down on it. "You should not be here," 13 said quietly. Moxie began to purr. The sound was unlike anything 13 had ever experienced. Not the controlled harmony of Ventari singing or the rhythmic clicking of Cathera communication. This was pure contentment, a vibration that seemed to resonate through the room and somehow passed 13's mental defenses. Approached cautiously. Moxie showed no signs of distress, no instinctive fear responses. The cat simply continued purring and began grooming her paw with typical feline focus. "How are you doing this?" 13 whispered. Moxie paused in her grooming and looked up at 13 with steady green eyes. For a moment, 13 felt something impossible, a sense of being truly seen, without judgment or fear or confusion, just acceptance. Then Moxie went back to her, grooming, and the moment passed. And spent the next hour sitting cross-legged beside their meditation mat, watching the small creature who had somehow bypassed defenses that had never failed before. When Moxie finally stretched, yawned, and squeezed back through the ventilation grate, 13 felt an unexpected sensation they could only describe as loss. The next morning brought news that spread through the academy like wildfire. Somehow, something had penetrated Cadet 13's legendary isolation. Whispered conversations followed 13 through the corridors as cadets and instructors alike tried to understand what had happened. "I heard their barriers failed completely," one Andranian cadet murmured to another. "Impossible," replied Asaros. "Zalani psychic fields are absolute." Then how did something get into their quarters? And ignored the speculation and made their way to the Tactical Simulation Center. Today's exercise was supposed to be particularly challenging, a multi-species coordination scenario that had defeated several previous cadet classes. Jake was already there when 13 arrived, chatting easily with a mixed group of cadets. He looked up and waved. "Morning, 13. How'd you sleep?" "Adequately," 13 replied, not mentioning the unusual visitor. Commander Kalos called for attention. "Today you will face the Harmony Protocol scenario. This simulation requires seamless cooperation between different species' strengths and communication styles. You will be divided into mixed teams of 6 cadets each." There felt a familiar confidence. Multi-species coordination was simply a matter of analyzing each species' capabilities and creating optimal task assignments. They had run similar scenarios dozens of times. "Team assignments are posted," Kelos continued. "Team leaders have been selected based on previous performance." 13 scanned the list and found their name as team leader for Group 4. Their teammates included Jake, 2 Ventari cadets, 1 Cathara, and a young Saros named Cadet Rask. A reasonable mix of abilities, though the inclusion of the human was puzzling. The team gathered at their assigned station. 13 immediately began analyzing the scenario parameters and calculating optimal strategies. "All right, team," 13 announced. "I have determined the most efficient approach. Cadet Rask, your thermal vision will handle perimeter monitoring. The Ventari will manage communication harmonics. The Cathara will coordinate supply logistics. The human will—" 13 paused, realizing they had no clear tactical role for Jake. Humans possessed no specialized abilities that improved mission performance. "Maybe we should talk about this as a group," Jake suggested. "Everyone might have ideas about how to approach the problem." "That would be inefficient," 13 replied. "I have already calculated the optimal solution." "But you haven't heard our perspectives yet," said Cadet Lyra, one of the Ventari. "This scenario might require approaches that pure logic can't anticipate." Stared at her blankly. "Logic is always sufficient for tactical problems." The simulation began, and 13's team found themselves aboard a damaged coalition vessel with failing life support systems. They needed to coordinate repairs while defending against periodic enemy attacks. Standard protocols called for establishing command hierarchy and following predetermined response patterns. Immediately began issuing orders based on their calculated strategy. Each team member was assigned specific tasks designed to maximize efficiency. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. Then, the simulation threw them an unexpected variable. The enemy began using adaptive tactics that changed based on the team's responses. Every time 13's team followed a logical pattern, the enemy countered with increasingly effective attacks. Standard tactical analysis couldn't predict the enemy's behavior because it wasn't following standard patterns. "We need to try something different," Jake said as their third defensive strategy failed. "They're learning from our moves." "Impossible," 13 insisted. "There must be an underlying pattern. More analysis will reveal the solution, but more analysis didn't help." The enemy continued adapting, and 13's team began taking serious damage. Systems failed faster than they could be repaired. Team members were getting frustrated and stressed. "Stop trying to control everything," Cadet Rask finally snapped. "Let us actually help instead of just following your orders." "My orders are based on optimal calculations," 13 protested. "Your calculations aren't working." Lyra's harmonious tones had shifted to discordant notes of stress. "This situation requires intuition, not just logic." Felt something they had never experienced before: complete tactical confusion. Their perfect analytical abilities were failing, and they had no alternative approach to fall back on. Jake stepped forward quietly. 13. What if we try working together instead of separately? I mean really together, not just following a plan." "That makes no logical sense," 13 replied, but their voice lacked its usual certainty. "Maybe that's the point," Jake said gently. "Sometimes the best solutions don't make sense until after they work." The simulation continued to deteriorate around them. 13 watched their carefully calculated strategy crumble while their teammates grew increasingly frustrated. For the first time in their life, being the smartest person in the room wasn't enough. "I don't understand," 13 admitted quietly. Jake moved closer, his voice calm and encouraging. "That's okay. Understanding isn't always the first step. Sometimes trust comes first." "Trust is illogical without sufficient data." "Yeah, but logic isn't the only tool we have," Jake replied. "What if we just try working as a team and see what happens?" Looked around at their teammates, all of them stressed, frustrated, and losing faith in their leadership. Everything 13 had always relied on was failing. Their perfect isolation, their analytical superiority, their untouchable confidence. None of it was helping their team succeed. For the first time in their life, Cadet 13 faced a choice between being right and being effective. The decision they made would change everything. Cadet 13 stood in the middle of the failing simulation, watching their perfect world collapse around them. Alarms blared, systems sparked with electrical failures, and their teammates looked at them with expressions ranging from frustration to outright anger. Everything 13 had always known about leadership and tactics was proving useless against an enemy that refused to follow logical patterns. 13, Jake said softly, moving to stand beside them. "What if we just let everyone do what they think is best? No orders, no assignments, just trust them to handle their part while we handle ours." The suggestion went against every principle 13 had ever learned. Teams needed coordination, structure, clear command hierarchies. Chaos was the enemy of efficiency, but their efficiency was failing spectacularly. "I do not know how to lead that way," 13 admitted. "Then don't lead," Jake replied with a gentle smile. "Just participate." For a moment, 13 felt completely lost. Their entire identity was built around being the one who knew the answers, who saw patterns others missed, who could solve any problem through pure analysis. Without that role, who were they? "Okay," 13 said quietly. "What should we do?" Jake turned to the team. "Everyone, forget the mission parameters for a minute. What do you actually see happening here? What feels wrong to you?" Cadet Rask, the young Sauros, spoke up immediately. "The enemy is watching us. Every time we follow a pattern, they counter it perfectly. It's like they're inside our heads." "The communication frequencies feel scrambled," added Lyra, the Ventari. "Not jammed exactly, but confused. Like someone is mixing up our signals." "Supply. Routes keep shifting," chittered Zex the Cathara. Materials appear and disappear in ways that don't match the ship's layout. Listen to these observations with growing amazement. Their teammates were noticing details that hadn't appeared in any of their analytical reports. How had they missed so much important information? What if this isn't really about fixing the ship? Jake suggested. What if it's about figuring out what the enemy actually wants? That's not tactical thinking, 13 protested automatically. Maybe tactical thinking isn't enough, Rask replied. My scales have been changing color since the simulation started. That only happens when I sense deception. I stared at him. You did not report this data? Because you never asked how we felt about anything, Lyra said, her tone still discordant with stress. You just told us what to do. The realization hit 13 like a physical blow. They had been treating their teammates like tools instead of thinking beings. All the subtle information that came from intuition, emotion, and species-specific senses had been ignored in favor of pure logical analysis. I made an error, 13 said slowly. We all make errors, Jake replied. The question is what we do next. For the first time in the simulation, 13 stopped trying to control everything and actually listened to their team. Rask's color-changing scale suggested the enemy was using deception rather than direct confrontation. Lyra's disrupted harmonics indicated communication jamming designed to create confusion rather than silence. Zex's shifting supply routes meant the enemy was manipulating their perception of the ship itself. They are not trying to destroy us, 13 realized. They are trying to make us destroy ourselves through poor coordination. So how do we fight that? Asked Lyra. Jake grinned. We stop trying to be perfect and start being real. What happened next? Went against every tactical principle 13 had ever learned. Instead of following a coordinated plan, each team member began responding to the situation based on their own judgment and instincts. Rask used his thermal vision to track real heat signatures instead of false sensor readings. Lyra created communication, harmonics that felt right rather than following technical specifications. Zex started moving supplies based on intuition rather than logistics charts. Found themselves doing something completely foreign. They stopped analyzing and started reacting. When alarms blared, they responded to the immediate crisis instead of calculating optimal responses. When teammates called for help, they provided it without questioning the efficiency of the request. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and completely illogical. It was also working. The enemy's adaptive tactics became useless when there was no pattern to adapt to. Their deception strategies failed when the team stopped relying on perfect information and started trusting their instincts. The ship's systems began responding to intuitive repairs rather than technical procedures. This is impossible, 13 muttered, watching their success indicators climb rapidly. Welcome to human tactics, Jake laughed. Sometimes the best plan is no plan at all. The simulation ended with their team achieving the highest coordination score in Academy history. As the exercise room powered down, 13 stood in stunned silence while their teammates celebrated around them. Commander Kellos approached with an expression of amazement. Cadet 13, that was the most unconventional tactical approach I have ever witnessed. How did you know to abandon structured command protocols? 13 looked at Jake, then back at the commander. I did not know. That was the point. That evening, 13 returned to their quarters feeling more confused than they had ever been in their life. Everything they thought they understood about leadership, tactics, and their own abilities had been turned upside down. They sat on their meditation mat, trying to process the day's events. The scratching at their ventilation grate had become a nightly occurrence. 13. No longer questioned it when Moxie squeezed through the gap and settled onto the mat beside them. The cat's presence had somehow become comforting rather than disturbing. "You do not follow logical patterns either," 13 said to Moxie, who responded by purring and curling up against 13's leg. For the first time, 13 allowed themselves to really examine what they were feeling. The sensation of Moxie's warm body against their leg created something they could only describe as contentment. Not the cold satisfaction of a problem solved correctly, but a warm feeling of simple companionship. "How do you ignore my barriers?" 13 asked softly. Moxie opened one green eye, looked at 13 with typical feline indifference, then went back to sleep. Watching the small creature, 13 began to understand something profound. Moxie didn't overcome the psychic barriers through any special ability or technique. She simply didn't acknowledge that the barriers existed. To her, 13 was just another being worthy of attention or companionship, with no more or less value than anyone else. The barriers were still there, as strong as ever. But for the first time, 13 wondered if maintaining them was actually a choice, rather than an unchangeable aspect of their nature. A soft knock at their door interrupted these thoughts. 13 opened it to find Jake standing in the corridor, looking concerned. "Hey, 13. I wanted to check on you. Today was pretty intense." Studied Jake's face, noting the genuine worry in his expression. "You are concerned about my emotional state." "Yeah, I am. Is that weird?" "It is unprecedented," 13 replied. "No one has ever expressed concern for my emotional well-being before." "Well, I'm expressing it now," Jake said with a gentle smile. "Want to talk about what happened today?" Considered this. Sharing personal thoughts and feelings was not something Zalani typically did. It served no logical purpose and created unnecessary vulnerability. But looking at Jake's kind expression and feeling Moxie's warm presence behind them, 13 made another, unprecedented choice. "Yes," they said quietly. "I would like that very much." As Jake entered their quarters, 13 realized that their perfect isolation was developing cracks, and for the first time in their life they weren't sure they wanted to repair them. The emergency klaxons pierced through the Academy's morning routine like a blade through silk. Cadet 13 was in the middle of their daily meditation when the urgent alarm dragged them back to consciousness. Red lights flashed throughout their quarters, and Commander Kalos's voice echoed through the communication system. "All senior cadets report to battle stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing their tactical gear and heading for the door. In the corridors, they encountered chaos. Cadets from every species rushed toward their assigned positions, voices raised in excitement and fear. Some of the younger students looked terrified. Even the instructors appeared tense. 13, Jake's voice called out above the noise. He jogged up beside them, Moxie tucked securely in a protective carrier on his chest. "Do you know what's happening?" "Unknown," 13 replied, though they noticed their own voice lacked its usual calm certainty. "The Academy has never activated full battle protocols during my time here." They reached the main briefing hall, where Commander Kalos stood before a massive tactical display. The screen showed the Academy's position relative to nearby star systems, with a cluster of unknown ships approaching from the outer rim. "Attention, cadets," Kalos began, his scales shifting to deep military green. "At 0630 hours, our long-range sensors detected an unidentified fleet moving toward Coalition space. Preliminary analysis suggests hostile intent. The fleet has already destroyed 2 automated monitoring stations and is ignoring all communication attempts. Studied the tactical display with growing concern. The enemy formation was unlike anything in their extensive database of known ship configurations. The vessels moved in patterns that seemed almost organic, flowing like a school of fish rather than maintaining rigid military formations. All advanced cadets will be assigned to operational positions aboard the UCS Horizon. Kalos continued. This is your first taste of real combat, cadets. Some of you may not return. A chill ran through the assembled students. Training exercises were one thing, but actual combat carried real consequences. 13 felt an unfamiliar sensation, something they thought might be fear, though they had no previous experience with the emotion to be certain. Cadet 13, you are assigned as Tactical Coordinator for Fighter Squadron 7, Kelos announced. Cadet Martinez, you will serve as Communications Liaison for the same squadron. 13 felt a moment of relief that they would be working with Jake, then immediately questioned why the human's presence should matter to their operational effectiveness. Within an hour, they were aboard the UCS Horizon, a sleek coalition cruiser, bristling with advanced weaponry and sensor arrays. The ship hummed with activity as crew members prepared for battle. 13 had never been in actual space combat before, and the reality was far more intense than any simulation. Fighter Squadron 7 consisted of 12 pilots from 6 different species, each flying craft designed for their particular physiological advantages. 13 took their position in the Tactical Coordination Center, surrounded by holographic displays showing real-time battle data. All squadrons, this is command, came the voice of Captain Torres, the Horizon's commander. Enemy fleet is 3 hours out. We're moving to intercept before they reach the academy. 13 began analyzing the approaching enemy formation, looking for patterns and weaknesses they could exploit. The ships moved in ways that defied conventional tactical analysis. Every time 13 thought they detected a pattern, the enemy formation shifted unpredictably. Jake, 13 said into their communications headset, are you receiving clear signals from all squadron members? That's the weird thing, Jake replied from his position in the communications bay. Everyone's equipment is working perfectly, but something's interfering with our coordination frequencies. It's like the enemy is jamming us without actually jamming us. The first engagement began 2 hours later. Coalition forces opened fire at maximum range, expecting to disrupt the enemy. Formation with long-distance strikes. Instead, the enemy ships seemed to flow around the weapons fire like water around stones, taking minimal damage while continuing their steady advance. Squadron 7, adjust targeting parameters, 13 commanded. Focus fire on the lead vessels, the squadron responded, concentrating their attack on what appeared to be command ships. The enemy formation rippled in response, but instead of breaking apart, it seemed to absorb the focused assault and redirect its energy toward a devastating counterattack. Squadron 7 taking heavy damage, came the panicked voice of pilot. Corex Akithra flying one of the faster interceptor craft. My starboard engine is gone. Watched the tactical display with growing alarm. Their squadron was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move. Standard tactical protocols were proving useless against opponents who didn't follow any recognizable combat patterns. All squadrons, fall back to defensive formation, Captain Torres ordered. We need to regroup and reassess. But the enemy didn't allow them time to regroup. The alien ships pressed their advantage, moving with coordinated precision that seemed impossible without some form of instantaneous communication. 13, Jake's voice crackled through the static-filled communication channel. I'm picking up something strange on the lower frequencies. It's not language exactly, but there's definitely a pattern. 13 tried to focus on Jake's report while simultaneously coordinating their scattered squadron. 2 more fighters had taken critical damage, and the remaining pilots were becoming increasingly disorganized. Can you isolate the pattern? 13 asked. Working on it, but our standard equipment isn't designed for this kind of analysis. It's like trying to hear a whisper in a thunderstorm. The battle continued to deteriorate. Every tactical maneuver 13 attempted was countered perfectly by the enemy. Their superior analytical abilities, which had never failed before, were completely useless against opponents who seemed to think collectively rather than individually. Squadron 7, emergency scatter pattern, 13 commanded as another wave of enemy fire tore through their formation. The pilots responded, but their movements lacked coordination. Fear and confusion were making effective teamwork impossible. 13 realized they were facing the same problem that had nearly defeated them in the Academy simulation. Their team was falling apart under pressure. I need to try something. Jake's voice came through the communication system. 13. I'm going to attempt direct contact with the enemy using our basic human communication protocols. It might not work, but our standard approaches certainly aren't helping. That is not authorized procedure, 13 replied automatically. Since when do we care about authorized procedure? Jake shot back. You taught me that sometimes the best plan is no plan at all. Felt something crack inside their chest. Jake was right. Everything they had learned about rigid protocols and perfect analysis was failing catastrophically. Their squadron was being destroyed while they clung to tactics that clearly weren't working. Do it, 13 said quietly. What happened next changed everything. Instead of trying to coordinate their remaining fighters through complex tactical commands, Jake began speaking to each pilot individually in their own language, addressing their specific fears and concerns. He abandoned all military protocol and simply talked to them like people who were scared and needed support. Corex, I know your starboard engine is gone, but your port engine is still running strong. You can do this. Violet, remember that maneuver you showed me in training? The one where you spin while firing? Now would be a perfect time to try it. Slowly, the scattered squadron began to respond, not to tactical orders, but to personal encouragement and individual attention. Jake was treating each pilot as a unique individual rather than a tactical asset. Watched in amazement as their squadron began to coordinate without formal coordination. Each pilot was operating independently, but somehow they were working together more effectively than they ever had under 13's precise tactical control. This should not be possible, 13 murmured. Human tactics, Jake replied with a grin in his voice. Sometimes caring about people works better than caring about tactics. But even with improved coordination, they were still losing. The enemy's collective intelligence was too strong, their weapons too advanced, their numbers too overwhelming. Squadron 7 was fighting bravely, but they were still being systematically destroyed. That's when 13 made a decision that terrified them more than any enemy attack. For the first time in their life, they chose to lower their psychic barriers and reach out telepathically to Jake, hoping that somehow their desperate need for connection might break through the human's non-telepathic mind. The mental contact failed, but something impossible happened instead. Jake, guided by pure intuition and his growing bond with 13, somehow understood exactly what was needed. Without receiving any telepathic message, he made a tactical decision that saved their entire squadron. In that moment, 13 realized that their greatest strength had also been their greatest weakness. They had been so untouchable that they had never learned to truly connect with anyone. And connection, they were beginning to understand, might be the most powerful force in the universe. The journey back to Kepler Prime Academy took 3 days. 3 days of medical treatment for wounded pilots, damage reports, and endless debriefings about the failed engagement with the unknown enemy. But for Cadet 13, those 3 days were filled with something far more significant than tactical analysis. They were filled with questions they had never thought to ask. Found themselves spending more and more time with Jake and Moxie in the ship's small recreation area. At first, they told themselves it was for operational debriefing purposes. They needed to understand how Jake had coordinated the squadron so effectively without formal tactical training. But as the hours passed, 13 began to admit they simply enjoyed the humans' company. "You saved us out there," 13 said during one of their conversations. "Your communication methods were far more effective than my tactical coordination." Jake shrugged, scratching Moxie behind the ears as she purred in his lap. "I just talked to them like people instead of chess pieces. Seemed like the right thing to do." "But how did you know what each pilot needed to hear? You have no telepathic abilities to read their emotional states. Body language, vocal tone, the way someone's breathing changes when they're scared," Jake explained. "Humans learn to read these signals because we can't read minds. We have to pay attention to everything else." Absorbed this information with fascination. They had always dismissed non-telepathic communication as primitive and unreliable. But Jake's ability to understand and connect with beings from completely different species suggested that emotional intelligence might be a more sophisticated skill than they had realized. "During the battle," 13 said carefully, "I attempted to establish telepathic contact with you." Jake looked up with interest. "Really? I didn't feel anything like that. But there was a moment when I suddenly knew exactly what you were thinking, like I could sense your plan before you announced it. That should not be possible." "Maybe impossible things happen more often than we think," Jake replied with a gentle smile. Moxie chose that moment to jump down from Jake's lap and walk over to 13. The small cat settled against their leg and began purring, just as she had been doing every evening in 13's quarters. The sound created that same sense of peaceful contentment that 13 was beginning to treasure. "I still do not understand how she ignores my psychic barriers," 13 said, looking down at Moxie. "Maybe she doesn't ignore them," Jake suggested. "Maybe she just doesn't care about them." "What is the difference?" Jake thought for a moment. "Ignoring something means you're aware of it, but choose not to respond. Not caring means it simply doesn't exist in your world. Moxie doesn't see barriers when she looks at you. She just sees someone who might give good chin scratches." He considered this. Their psychic barriers were a fundamental part of their identity, a defense mechanism that had defined their entire existence. But what if those barriers were not as absolute as they had always believed? What if they were, in some sense, a choice they had been making unconsciously? "Jake," 13 said slowly, "would you be willing to help me with an experiment?" "Sure." "What kind of experiment?" "I want to try lowering my psychic barriers deliberately. Just for a moment. I have never attempted this before, and I am uncertain what might happen." Jake's expression grew serious. "Is it dangerous?" "Unknown. Zelani children are taught to maintain constant barriers from birth. Lowering them as an adult is considered. 13 paused, searching for the right word. Unthinkable. But you want to try anyway? Yes. Jake nodded. Okay, what do you need me to do? 13 felt a warm sensation they were beginning to recognize as gratitude. Jake didn't question their desire to attempt something their entire species would consider madness. He simply offered to help. Remain calm and speak to me if you notice any changes in my behavior. If I appear to be in distress, establish physical contact to anchor me to immediate reality. Got it. Closed their eyes and began the most terrifying thing they had ever attempted. The psychic barriers that surrounded their mind were like walls of crystalline energy, beautiful and impenetrable. They had maintained these walls for so long that they felt like part of their essential self. Slowly, carefully, 13 began to lower one small section of their defenses. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Emotions, thoughts, and sensations from nearby crew members flooded into their consciousness like water through a broken dam. Fear, exhaustion, relief, homesickness, curiosity, dozens of different emotional states crashed into 13's awareness simultaneously. Too much, 13 gasped, immediately raising their barriers again. Too much information. You okay? Jake asked, moving closer with concern. Yes, but the experience was... 13 struggled to find words. Chaotic. How do telepathic species function? With such constant emotional interference? Maybe they learn to filter it gradually, Jake suggested, like learning to focus on one conversation in a crowded room. Over the following days, 13 began practicing small experiments with lowering their barriers for brief moments. Each time, they experienced the overwhelming rush of external emotions, but gradually they began to understand how to filter the information rather than being drowned by it. Jake proved to be an invaluable teacher in this process. His insights into emotional intelligence helped 13 understand that feelings were not simply chaotic noise to be eliminated, but information to be interpreted and understood. Emotions tell you things that logic can't, Jake explained during one of their practice sessions. When someone is afraid, it might mean they see danger you've missed. When someone is excited, they might have spotted an opportunity. Emotions are data, just a different kind than what you're used to. 13 began to see their crew members in an entirely new way. The Saros navigator, who had always seemed coldly efficient, was actually deeply homesick for his desert planet. The Andranian engineer, who appeared cheerfully optimistic, was working through grief over a recent loss. The Ventari communications officer was struggling with self-doubt despite her professional competence. I never realized how much I was missing, 13 admitted to Jake as they watched their fellow crew members interact in the recreation area. All this emotional complexity was happening around me constantly, and I was completely unaware of it. It's not your fault, Jake replied. You were taught to protect yourself from it. But protection and connection don't have to be mutually exclusive. That evening, as they prepared to dock at Kepler Prime, Moxie made her usual visit to 13's temporary quarters. But this time, instead of simply accepting the cat's presence, 13 made a conscious choice to lower their barriers slightly while Moxie was near. The result was extraordinary. 13 could sense the cat's simple, uncomplicated contentment. Moxie wasn't thinking about barriers or differences or social complications. She was simply enjoying the moment, the warmth, the gentle touch of 13's hand on her fur. You taught me something important, 13 said quietly to the purring cat. You showed me that connection doesn't require understanding everything about someone else. Sometimes it just requires being present with them. When they returned to the academy, news of the failed engagement had already spread throughout the coalition. The unknown enemy had retreated after the initial battle, but their message was clear. They possessed technology and tactics that could overwhelm conventional coalition forces. Emergency sessions were being called. New strategies were being developed. The galaxy was preparing for a threat unlike anything they had faced before. But for 13, the real revolution was happening on a much smaller scale. They were learning that their greatest strength, the untouchable isolation that had made them a tactical genius, could coexist with something they had never experienced before. They were learning how to choose connection without losing themselves, how to be vulnerable without being defenseless, and how to trust others without abandoning their own judgment. They were learning, with the help of a human and his cat, that being untouchable didn't have to mean being alone. The emergency alert came at dawn, 3 weeks after the Academy had returned to normal operations. Cadet 13 was practicing their daily barrier control exercises when every communication device in their quarters began screaming simultaneous warnings. Red lights flashed throughout the academy as Commander Kilos's voice echoed through the halls. All personnel to emergency stations. Unknown fleet detected at system perimeter. This is not a drill. That moved quickly to the main briefing hall, where they found chaos. Hundreds of cadets and instructors crowded around tactical displays showing sensor readings that made no sense. The unknown fleet was massive, easily 3 times larger than any coalition force, and it was moving directly toward Kepler Prime. "Attention!" came the voice of Admiral Varath, the Academy's commander. "Long-range communications indicate that the unknown fleet has issued an ultimatum to the Coalition Council. They demand complete surrender within 6 hours, or they will begin systematic destruction of all Coalition worlds." Murmurs of fear and anger rippled through the assembled crowd. 13 spotted Jake near the front of the group, Moxie tucked securely in her carrier. The human's face was pale but determined. "The fleet appears to consist of a previously unknown species," Admiral Varath continued. "Initial analysis suggests they operate as a collective consciousness, a hive mind of unprecedented scale. All attempts at diplomatic contact have failed." Felt a chill of recognition. A hive mind would explain the enemy's perfect coordination during their previous battle. Individual ships acting as parts of a single consciousness could coordinate in ways that no collection of separate minds could match. "Sir," called out Commander Kilos, "what are our defensive capabilities against such a force?" Admiral Varath's expression was grim. "Minimal. Our conventional tactics assume individual decision-makers with predictable psychological patterns. Against a true hive mind, standard coalition strategies are useless." As if to prove his point, the tactical display updated with horrifying news. 3 coalition patrol fleets that had moved to intercept the alien armada had been destroyed in minutes. The enemy had adapted to their tactics instantly, overwhelming each defense force with perfect coordination. "All advanced cadets are being mobilized for Operation Last Stand," Admiral Varath announced. "This may be the final battle for Coalition independence. I will not lie to you. Our chances of survival are minimal." The briefing dissolved into organized chaos as cadets rushed to their assigned positions. 13 found themselves walking beside Jake toward the Tactical Coordination Center, their mind racing through possible strategies against an enemy that thought as one mind. "This is what we faced before," Jake said quietly. "The collective intelligence that could predict every move because it thinks faster and more completely than we can." "Correct," 13 replied. Individual tactical analysis is useless against a hive mind. They can process information and coordinate responses faster than any single consciousness. So how do we fight them? Thurn paused in the corridor, struck by a sudden realization. We do not fight them individually. We become something they cannot understand. Jake raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? The hive mind expects unified thought and coordinated action. But what if we could create something else? What if we could link individual minds while maintaining individual consciousness? Is that possible? 13 thought about their recent experiments with lowering their psychic barriers, their growing ability to sense emotions and thoughts without being overwhelmed by them. It might be, but it would require me to act as a telepathic relay between dozens of different minds simultaneously. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is. The strain could destroy my mind completely, and even if it worked, I do not know if such a chaotic network could function effectively against a perfectly coordinated enemy. They reached the tactical center to find it in full preparation mode. Officers from every coalition species worked frantically to coordinate defenses, but 13 could see the futility in their efforts. Standard military hierarchies and communication protocols were too slow, too rigid to match the enemy's collective consciousness. Admiral Varath approached them with urgency. Cadet 13, you are our most talented tactical analyst. We need strategic options. Looked around the room at the desperate faces of officers who knew they were facing an impossible situation. They thought about Jake's lessons in emotional intelligence, Moxie's simple acceptance of connection without barriers, and their own growing understanding that strength could come from vulnerability. Admiral, I have a proposal that violates every standard protocol. At this point, standard protocols are clearly inadequate. Proceed. I can attempt to create a telepathic network linking coalition forces. Instead of fighting as separate units, following orders, we could operate as a unified consciousness while maintaining individual creativity and adaptability. Admiral Varath stared at 13 in shock. That would require you to lower your psychic barriers completely while managing dozens of separate minds. Such a procedure could kill you. Yes, sir. But it might be our only chance to match the enemy's coordination while maintaining our diversity of thought. Even if such a network were possible, how would you maintain your own identity while channeling so many other minds? Looked at Jake, who understood immediately. I'll stay with 13 during the process. Human minds might be different enough to serve as an anchor point, helping them remember their individual self while managing the network. This is madness, Admiral Varath said. Yes, sir, 13 replied calmly. But conventional sanity has failed against this enemy. The Admiral studied 13's face for a long moment, then nodded grimly. Proceed with preparation. We have 4 hours before the enemy reaches firing range. What followed was the most intensive preparation 13 had ever experienced. Medical teams monitored their vital signs while they practiced expanding their barrier control to unprecedented levels. Communications officers established links with every coalition ship in the system. Jake remained beside them throughout the process, Moxie purring softly in her carrier as if sensing the importance of the moment. Are you sure about this? Jake asked as the final preparations were completed. No, 13 replied honestly, but I am certain that conventional approaches will fail. Sometimes the only logical choice is to attempt something impossible. As the enemy fleet approached weapon range, 13 took their position at the center of the coordination network. Dozens of communication links connected them to coalition forces throughout the system. Medical monitors tracked their vital signs. Jake sat beside them with Moxie, ready to serve as an anchor to individual consciousness. All units. This is Cadet. 13, they announced through the network. I am about to attempt something that has never been tried before. You may experience brief telepathic contact. Do not resist the connection. Trust in your individual judgment while sharing your awareness. Closed their eyes and began the most terrifying thing they had ever attempted. Slowly, carefully, they lowered their psychic barriers completely for the first time in their life. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of minds flooded into their consciousness. Human thoughts, Saros instincts, Ventari harmonies, Cathara collective awareness, Andranian curiosity. Every species brought their unique perspective and abilities into the growing network. For a moment, 13 thought they would be lost entirely, dissolved into the chaos of multiple consciousness. But then they felt Jake's hand on their shoulder and heard Moxie's steady purring, anchoring them to their individual identity. I am still myself, 13 whispered. But I am also connected to everyone. Through the network, they could sense every coalition ship, every pilot, every gunner. But unlike the enemy's hive mind, each individual maintained their own creativity, their own instincts, their own unique abilities. Enemy fleet entering firing range, came the report from the sensor operators. All units, 13 said through the network, their voice reaching every mind simultaneously. Engage the enemy, trust your instincts, coordinate through feeling rather than orders, fight as one while thinking as many. The final battle for coalition independence was about to begin, and 13 was about to discover whether chaos and connection could triumph over perfect unity. The battle began with a symphony of chaos that should have been impossible to coordinate. Through the telepathic network, Cadet 13 experienced the conflict from dozens of perspectives simultaneously. They felt the steady determination of Saros, gunners, the harmonious flow of Ventari pilots, the collective tactical awareness of Cathara squadrons, and the creative unpredictability of human crews. Most remarkably, they felt each individual mind maintaining its unique character while sharing awareness with all the others. This is extraordinary. Admiral Varath's thoughts flowed through the network. I can sense every ship's position and status without losing my own tactical judgment. The enemy hive mind had expected to face the same rigid military formations they had destroyed before. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented, a force that moved with perfect coordination but completely unpredictable creativity. Coalition ships flowed around enemy fire like a school of fish, but each vessel chose its own path based on individual pilot instincts. Gunners fired with collective awareness of target priorities but individual creativity in attack patterns. The result was a battle formation that the hive mind couldn't analyze or predict. They are confused, 13 observed, sensing the enemy's mental state through the network. They cannot process our tactical pattern because we have no single pattern. Through the connection, 13 felt Jake's amazement as he witnessed the impossible coordination around them. It's like jazz music, he thought. Everyone playing their own part, but creating harmony together. The enemy responded by increasing their attack intensity, trying to overwhelm the coalition through pure firepower. But the telepathic network allowed instant damage reports and coordinated responses. When ships were injured, others moved to cover them automatically. When ammunition ran low, supply ships positioned themselves perfectly without waiting for orders. How are they doing this? Came the frustrated thoughts of the enemy hive mind, broadcasting their confusion across space. For the first time, 13, made direct telepathic contact with the alien consciousness. The experience was overwhelming, like touching a vast ocean of unified thought. The hive mind was powerful beyond imagination, but it was also limited in ways they had never considered. You think as one, 13 projected through the network. We think as many while acting as one. You cannot understand us because you have forgotten what individual choice means. The hive mind recoiled from the contact, disturbed by concepts they couldn't process. Individual thought is chaos. Unity is perfection. You will be absorbed or destroyed. We choose neither, 13 replied, feeling the strength of every connected mind supporting them. We choose to be different. The battle shifted as the hive mind realized they were facing something their collective intelligence couldn't overcome through conventional analysis. They began targeting the Academy directly, trying to destroy the source of the telepathic network. They're focusing on our position, Jake observed, watching enemy ships converge on Kepler Prime. Felt a moment of fear, not just their own, but shared concern from every mind in the network. If the connection was broken, the coalition forces would return to individual operation and likely be destroyed within minutes. All units maintain network integrity, 13 projected. I can sustain the connection even under attack. What followed was the most intense trial of 13's life. Enemy weapons pounded the Academy's defenses while they struggled to maintain telepathic links with dozens of separate minds. The strain was enormous, threatening to tear their consciousness apart. But every time 13 felt themselves beginning to fracture, they felt Jake's steady presence beside them and heard Moxie's calm purring. The simple, uncomplicated acceptance of the small cat reminded them that connection didn't require perfection or understanding, just the choice to be present with others. I can feel you getting tired, Jake said softly. Is there anything I can do? Just stay with me. 13 replied. Help me remember who I am while I become part of everyone else. Through the network, 13 sensed a remarkable transformation taking place among the coalition forces. Individual crews were learning to trust each other in ways they never had before. Saros pilots were incorporating Ventari harmony into their flight patterns. Human creativity was inspiring Kithara tactical innovations. Andranian analytical skills were enhancing everyone's target acquisition. The coalition wasn't just fighting as a unified force. They were becoming something greater than the sum of their parts while remaining proudly individual. This unity without uniformity is impossible, the hive mind broadcast in frustration. That's the point, came Jake's voice through the network, somehow audible to all minds simultaneously. We're not trying to be possible, we're trying to be ourselves. The enemy's confusion reached a critical point as they faced tactical responses they couldn't predict or counter. Their collective intelligence could process information faster than any individual mind, but it couldn't understand the creative chaos of dozens of different species thinking together while maintaining their unique perspectives. In desperation, the hive mind attempted a final gambit. They tried to force their way into the telepathic network, seeking to absorb or destroy the coalition's unusual consciousness. The mental invasion was like a tsunami of unified thought, crashing against the diverse symphony of individual minds. 13 felt themselves being pulled toward the overwhelming unity of the hive mind, threatened with losing their individual identity entirely. But at the crucial moment, they felt something extraordinary. Every mind in the network chose to support them, not by thinking the same thoughts or feeling the same emotions, but by each contributing their unique strength to help 13 maintain their individual self while serving as the network's center. Jake's stubborn human determination, the Sauros's patient endurance, the Ventari's harmonious balance, the Cathara's collective wisdom, the Andranian's curious adaptability, all flowed through 13 without overwhelming their personal identity. "You cannot absorb us," 13 projected, to the hive mind with absolute certainty. "We choose our connections. We are not trapped by unity because we are not afraid of diversity." The concept shattered something fundamental in the enemy's collective consciousness. They had built their entire existence on the premise that individual thought was weakness, that perfect unity was the highest form of existence. Faced with beings who were stronger together precisely because they remained different, the hive mind couldn't process the contradiction. "This is impossible," the enemy broadcast one final time before their fleet began withdrawing from Coalition space. As the last enemy ship disappeared into hyperspace, the telepathic network gradually dissolved. 13 felt each individual mind withdraw to its own consciousness, but not before experiencing a moment of profound gratitude from every connected being. "We did it," Jake said softly, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Opened their eyes to find the tactical center erupting in celebration. Coalition forces had achieved the impossible. They had defeated an enemy that should have been unbeatable through sheer collective intelligence. But for 13, the real victory was more personal. They had learned to be both untouchable and connected, maintaining their individual strength while choosing to share it with others. Admiral Varath approached with an expression of awe. "Cadet 13, what you accomplished today was unprecedented. You've changed the entire nature of Coalition military capability." "I had help," 13 replied, looking at Jake and Moxie. "I learned that being untouchable doesn't mean being alone. True strength comes from choosing when and how to connect with others." Months later, at their graduation ceremony, 13 received their commission as the first Zilani officer qualified for Integrated Species Command. Jake became their executive officer, and Moxie received an honorary rank as Chief Morale Officer, the first cat in galactic history to hold military position. In their final Academy log entry, 13 reflected on the journey that had brought them from perfect isolation to chosen connection. "I once believed that being untouchable was my greatest strength. I was wrong. My greatest strength is the ability to choose when to lower my barriers and connect with others. The galaxy is vast and full of different ways of thinking and being. True power comes not from standing apart from that diversity, but from choosing to be part of it while remaining yourself." As they prepared to take command of their first starship, 13 felt Moxie rub against their leg and begin purring. The small cat had taught them the most important lesson of all, that love and acceptance don't require understanding everything about someone else. Sometimes they just require being present and choosing to care. The galaxy was safer now, not because they had defeated one enemy, but because they had learned that strength and vulnerability could coexist, that unity and diversity could enhance each other, and that the greatest barriers could become bridges when crossed by choice rather than force. Cadet 13 was no longer untouchable. They were something far more powerful. They were connected by choice to a universe full of remarkable beings who had chosen to trust them in return.